seekers. I've been asked recently a couple of times to comment about the concept of original sin, which I think is odd because I'm not a Christian. I was raised in a sort of nominally Christian household. We were sort of vaguely Protestant, but we never went to church or anything. So the whole concept of sin is kind of hard for me to wrap my head around, let alone original sin. So my whole understanding of original sin is basically, this idea of Adam and Eve, and that Eve tempted Adam to eat from the tree of knowledge, which was the original sin, that Adam and Eve had no sin before then, and then they disobeyed God, and then they had sin, and then because of that, man is fallen, and that each individual human being is now born with sin. So a baby is not born innocent, as that movie, the movie with Linda Blair. Nobody remember. Only people my age would possibly remember that. But it was a really controversial movie back when I was in high school that Linda Blair, who had been in The Exorcist, starred in when she was a teenager. And it had like a rape scene in it, and it was really controversial. Anyway, nobody is born innocent. They are born immediately with sin, and start out sinful, and that people are naturally sinful, I guess. And that's the idea of that. And I always make the joke whenever the idea of original sin comes up is that my sins are never very original, which I think is kind of I don't think any of our sins are very original, but I don't think that's the idea. I think the idea is that man has fallen and that we're all originally bad. And Buddhism doesn't really have a concept of sin. We have this concept of karma, and sin, as I understand it, is this idea that God makes the rules, and you have to kind of figure out what God's rules are, and they're kind of arbitrary. If God says something is against the rules, then it's against the rules. Whereas Buddhism has karma, and karma is quite different from sin. And I should probably do a whole video contrasting the Buddhist concept of karma with the idea of sin, but that's not what I want to do this video about. What I'd rather do this video about is contrast the Buddhist idea of original enlightenment with the Christian idea of original sin. So I'd rather talk about original enlightenment. And original enlightenment, I'll give you a definition that I found in the description of a book called Original Enlightenment, which I haven't read, but it's a book by Jacqueline Stone, and here's the description that the publishers give for Original Enlightenment, and as a kind of promotion for the book in Original Enlightenment, but they start off with a description of what Original Enlightenment is, which I think is really useful. So here's their description. Original Enlightenment thought, hongaku shiso, that's the Japanese word for it, dominated Buddhist intellectual circles throughout Japan's medieval period. Enlightenment, this discourse claims, is neither a goal to be achieved nor a potential to be realized, but the true status of all things. Every animate and inanimate object manifests the primordial enlightened Buddha just as it is. Seen in its true aspect, every activity of daily life, eating, sleeping, even one's deluded thinking, is the Buddha's conduct. Emerging from within the powerful Tendai school, ideas of original enlightenment were appropriated by a number of Buddhist traditions and influenced nascent theories about the kami. That's a Japanese, that's from the Shinto school, which is not Buddhism, but it's a Shinto school, Shinto religion. And anyway, as well as medieval aesthetics and literary and performing arts. Scholars and commentators have long recognized the historical importance of original Enlightenment thought, but differ heatedly over how it is to be understood. Some tout it as the pinnacle of the Buddhist philosophy of absolute non-dualism. Others claim to find in it the paradigmatic expression of a timeless Japanese spirituality. According to other readings, it represents a dangerous antinomianism. That's one of those words I had to go look up. Antinomianism means one who holds that under the gospel dispensation of grace, the moral law is of no use or obligation because faith alone is necessary to salvation, or one who rejects a socially established morality. So that's what that means. And the sentence continues, that undermined observance of moral precepts precipitated a decline in Buddhist scholarship and denied the need for religious discipline. So they think original enlightenment means you because you're originally enlightened, you don't need to be ethical or moral at all. That's the argument there. Still others denounce it as an authoritarian ideology that by sacralizing the given order has in effect legitimized hierarchy and discriminative social practices. Can't read today. So yeah, the idea being that because of, and this is really convoluted and always hard for me to follow this logic. But because of original enlightenment means everything is okay as it is, then that means the social positions that everybody has are great as they are. So anybody who's born into a low caste, because Japan has a kind of a caste system. It's not quite as rigid as like the Indian caste system, but it has one. And so low caste people are low caste, and that's okay, and so the authority that exists of high caste people is good, and they should remain as such, and this legitimizes it. That's the argument there. Often the acceptance or rejection of original enlightenment thought is seen as the fault line along which traditional Buddhist institutions, the old ones, are to be differentiated from new Buddhist movements, and new meaning now about 1,000 or more years old, including Zen, Pure Land, and Nichiren, that arose during Japan's medieval period. And that's that. My first Zen teacher, Tim McCarthy, talked about original enlightenment fairly often, and I heard a lot from him, and he was rather fond of the idea, not the bad parts of it, but the good parts of it, which said that we are all originally enlightened. So enlightenment is not something that you come by through practice and you make a great effort to bring it about, that you're originally enlightened and that your practice is to kind of, I suppose, uncover that originally occurring enlightenment. Now, my other Zen teacher, Nishijima Roshi, I don't remember him ever using the words original enlightenment. When it comes to Dogen, there's nothing I can recall in Shobo Genzo where Dogen says, hey kids, there's this thing called original enlightenment, you should all hear about it. But if you understand the concept of original enlightenment and know what you're looking for, you can find that he does kind of reference it in a sort of roundabout way, especially this idea that even our deluded thoughts, even our deluded thinking is part of Buddha's enlightened activity. And I looked up a couple examples to give you, so I did a little bit of work for you. Here's one from an essay called Uji, Being Time. And it says, enactment of the 16-foot golden body, that's enlightenment, by using the 16-foot golden body is realized as the establishment of the mind, as training as the state of bodhi and nirvana, etc., etc. And even a moment of half-perfectly realized existence time is the perfect realization of half-existence time. So even half-realization is perfect realization of half-realization. And then he goes on to say, even those phases in which we seem to be blundering heedlessly are also existence. If we leave it utterly up to existence, even though the moments before and after manifest heedless blundering, they abide in their place as existence time. So even our misunderstandings are part of true understanding in a more universal sense. And here's one from the Flower of Dharma turns the Flower of Dharma. He says, the flower of Dharma is turning, which is a kind of a symbol of enlightenment. means the mind is in delusion. The mind being deluded is just the flower of Dharma turning. Therefore, when the mind is in delusion, we are being turned by the flower of Dharma. This means that even when mental delusion is in myriad phenomena, form is as it is, still being turned by the flower of Dharma. This being so, the present is the form as it is of the state of experience, and even alarm, doubt, and fear are nothing other than reality as it is. And so that's a kind of, this is one of the ways in which Dogen expresses this idea of original enlightenment. So we are originally enlightened. So even now, even right now, you right there sitting here watching the video wherever you are, probably sitting there on the toilet with your phone or whatever, watching this video, you're originally enlightened. You're enlightened right now. Enlightenment isn't something that you gain in the future through practice or through, whatever circumstances bring it about. This is enlightenment. This is enlightenment. That's what original enlightenment is. And in a sense, it's a much more sort of hopeful idea or positive idea than the idea of original sin, which is kind of, a kick in the head. No, that isn't the phrase I want. Some of the first people who discovered Buddhism, some of the first Westerners who discovered Buddhism, thought that Buddhism was a highly pessimistic religion. In contrast to Christianity, which they thought of as very optimistic. But it's kind of funny or ironic that Buddhism has this idea of original enlightenment, which I would say is a highly optimistic idea, in contrast to Christianity, which has this idea of original sin, which is kind of pessimistic. So it's kind of funny there that the Christians thought of Buddhism as being pessimistic in contrast to their optimistic religion, when, you could argue that the opposite is true. Lately, I've been reading this book, Emptiness and Omnipresence. I've referred to it a few times. I'm still not finished with the book, by Brooke A. Zipporah. I'm always reading 10 books at once, and I've been reading a book about Jimi Hendrix and reading this at the same time, so I go back and forth. Anyway, he has a good discussion here about the origins of original enlightenment in a chapter called Buddha Nature and Original Enlightenment. I don't know if I can show that to you. And according to him, the early Buddhists had this idea of nirvana, which was kind of complete extinction, the unconditioned state. But to them, in early Buddhism, this unconditioned state started at some point in time. But when people sort of started thinking about that philosophically, that didn't make sense. How could the unconditioned start at a certain point in time when it's the unconditioned? I'm really trying to squeeze about 10 pages of explanation into a few minutes of explanation, and it's not working very well, so you'll have to read the book to get the whole deal. But let me read you just a little bit of this to give you a sense of it. How can nirvana, defined only as the precise opposite of every possible image, idea, object, or state, be an aspect of every possible image, idea, object, or state? The answer lies within the problem itself. When we hear that nirvana is not this, not that, not anything else, we tend to inadvertently form an image in our minds, an image of complete blankness. We mentally remove red, blue, hot, cold, round, square, pleasure, pain, and every other particular state we can imagine. We are left with an empty screen, blank space, an infinity of blackness or whiteness. But undifferentiated whiteness is also something. Undifferentiated blackness is also something. A blank screen is also something. Even nothingness is something, since nothingness is conceived as the opposite of what exists. Nirvana cannot be blankness, cannot be nothingness, cannot be a state of total devoidness of all characteristics. What is the definition of something? It is very simple. It is whatever is able to exclude something else. Blankness, nothingness have the power to exclude something. In fact, they exclude everything. Nirvana cannot be any one of these, etc., etc. If we must find an image with which to visualize this, we should imagine not a blank, not an unending expanse of blackness, not an unmarked white wall, but something like a mirror. a blank wall has no color. A mirror also has no color, but the blank wall's no color is actually a color, white. This is what allows it to exclude everything else, blah, blah, blah. A mirror's no color, on the other hand, is no particular color, but for that reason it can be any color. Nirvana is nothing in the latter sense. Its nothingness is also everything. Its everything is also nothing. It can be anything, therefore it is definitively nothing. And this goes on and on for several pages, and it's a really interesting argument, and it's a good read, and I can recommend the book, even though I haven't finished it yet, as being a really good intellectual sort of explanation of this concept and how you get to this idea of original enlightenment from an original idea, from a first idea of sort of nothingness and emptiness, to an idea of everything is enlightenment, everything is just perfect as it is, even when it is clearly and observably pretty imperfect. Did you get all that? I don't know. It's pretty interesting and pretty tough stuff. But I think it's... Whenever I do these videos, I don't intend them, for these 15 to 20 minute videos to be like the definitive statement on anything, and just to sort of give you a kind of a taste of something that you can use to kind of go on and further study it. So I hope that's what I provided there. So if you want to help me continue to make these videos and lead you to kind of go on to look into more stuff for yourself, you can go to the URL that you're seeing below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. I survive on your donations, and your donations alone for the most part, because that is how I make my money. But as always, this is offered for free, so you don't gotta donate if you don't want to donate. So that's it, and at the beginning of the video I played you a little bit of my interpretation of the bass line from Like a Virgin by Madonna, and I'll play you out with a little bit more of that bass line. I used to play the song with a band that I played in the first year that I lived in Japan, which was called My Niece's Foot. And we used to play Like a Virgin, and I didn't ever learn the bass line the way you were supposed to play it, but I made up my own version, and that's what you heard at the beginning and what you're going to hear at the end if you stick around for it. So we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time, and I'll show you a little bit of Ziggy before we leave too, because I know you all love that. See you later. Bye. Hey Ziggy, it's time for your cameo. You enjoying your sunbeam today? Yeah, it's nice and warm here. Well, we'll go outside in a little bit. Alright, enjoy your sunbeam, Ziggy. See you later.